Ladies and gentlemen, in 1971, Peter helped establish the first executive program at the Claremont Graduate University. 52 years later, President of the university, Dr. Len Jessup, will tell us exactly what in those 52 years. Len, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Dave. I think Bruce could probably do this better than me, but there's a lot has happened. You think about over that time, so many. I'm just Michele, your story. I'm reminded of the many, many, many captains of industry who he worked with and affected, and many of whom came to Claremont, would drive in, fly in, meet with him on campus, or more commonly at his house, the little bungalow that the university still owns. It's set up as a museum. I'd invite people, when you come to campus, just let us know, and we'll do a tour of the little bungalow behind the Sprouts, just up off of Foothill Boulevard. And then, Dave, I'm thinking, you're sort of thinking about your idea, people influenced by Peter. At a conversation, an email exchange with Jim Collins just recently, and he was talking about the effect that Peter had on his works. Tom Peters visited campus just a few weeks ago. His archives are now with us. He speaks very highly of Peter and how he was influenced by Peter. And, how often is it that a faculty member then has the business school named after them? That never happens anywhere.
Yes.
So that's, of course, then it's the Drucker School, and then it's the Drucker Ito School. The Burkle building happens. The full suite of MBA programs as they develop, not only the traditional Masters of Management, that's still there, it's still very popular, but there's a full-time MBA and a flex MBA for working professionals, and now an online MBA, and a suite of other masters along with the Masters of Management. The faculty in Drucker are reviving the old executive PhD program. I think some of you will be happy to hear, backed by popular demand. Kind of more modern and retooled, maybe, with better modalities, but that's on its way back. The Drucker Index, the rankings, and the fund associated with it, that all happens. That's all thriving and doing well. And then probably the most recent, because it's sort of now about to happen, is Cadogan Hall. Patrick Cadogan also got the executive PhD, studied under Peter, thought very highly of him. We pitched Patrick Cadogan on a concept of a building, interdisciplinary School of Arts and Humanities, Drucker School, all the mashup coming together. Kind of the arts, in commerce. So that in our mind was the Da Vinci concept, kind of the Renaissance, if you will, in Florence. Patrick liked that. So the Patrick and his family, and he's now passed on, and the estate are pretty much fully funding the construction of Cadogan Hall, which now breathes life into that vision. And that'll be coming soon, breaking ground, hopefully within a few months. Hoping to have that done, during the or shortly after the centennial year. So I think Peter would be happy. A lot has happened in his name.
That's really nice to know. Then let me start with you. The first question on this, continue with you, Len. How has Drucker's presence at Claremont shaped its philosophy and approach to higher education?
I'll try to be quick. I know we got a lot of panelists and a lot of questions, and a couple of quick anecdotes. Vijay Sade here, a longtime faculty member, again, told me a great story that when he interviewed way back when, and he's going around to do his interviews with everybody, and it's time to meet Peter. Peter wanted to meet at the house, like Peter often did with people. And Vijay tells a story of spending several hours there with Peter at the house, and that they practically never talked about work. It was a whole conversation about themselves and their lives, and their aspirations, and their kids, and the aspirations for their kids, and a very personal conversation of them getting to know each other. And I thought that says a lot about Peter. It also, because that was the interview. And then it says a lot about Vijay that he passed the test, I think, in that interview with Peter. And another one that either Peter or Bernie told me, I can't remember which, but it was about Peter working with the coach of the Cleveland Indians. It's about 1985, 1986. They're doing terribly. Peter convinces the coach that he needs to take a more humanistic approach with the players, that was the problem that they'd had, the solution. So the coach does that. And then before the season starts, he has through the season 2, 3 separate times that he meets with every single player just to talk about them and their lives and what they're going through. And sure enough, the next year they have more wins, their attendance goes up, and they're more profitable, just based on that suggestion of humanistic management. So you see, my point is, you see that through all the programs we're doing in Drucker and beyond Drucker, and it spills into other parts of our portfolio. The MBA program, those platforms all have now the Drucker signature platform. That's got a big dose of Drucker philosophy. It's got a whole leadership and humanism kind of component for what your purpose is as a leader, a leadership practicum, all based around the Drucker philosophy. So the approach on how we approach the 4-credit graduate stuff has been profound, and it's still there.
How important is that to add a humanist element and compassion to higher education and students, especially, of course,
think about it. I mean, nod heads if you approve. I probably could use a little bit more humanism in the way that we're being led right now. I think both politically and in our organizations, and our corporations, and our nonprofits. Yeah.
Thank you so much for
Hugely
this.
important.
Thank you, Len. Dr. Dave, your question is, how have Drucker's philosophy, principles, and management ideas of the past influenced and reshaped management practices of today and possibly future generations to come? You are on mute.
I realize I have to unmute. I went in a session recently for 1.5 minutes without unmuting, and at the end of the session, someone said that 1.5 minutes was the best you've ever been. So first of all, I am so honored to hear the anecdotes. I did not know Peter Drucker. I was in rooms where he spoke, but I look so forward to the anecdotes. The things I bring, and I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but in much of our ideas, we begin with the word. And the word is the truth. And the word shapes how we think and how we act. And so what I'd like to suggest is the principles and ideas that Peter Drucker shaped are the words and principles that determine how we live and act today, because we are shaped by those words. I'll just hit a couple really quickly. And I love Len the place. Michele, I was privileged to work with Herman Miller. We learned at Herman Miller that the place matters. But when you have a great place, Len, like Claremont, it's not just the place, it's the words that are expressed when you're in that very special place. And so a couple of those words jump out at me. He determined that management matters. Go back into the 30s and 40s. This was time and motion studies when they did the Hawthorne studies, and they were looking at all the physical things that made you successful. He was counter to that. He said, it's not just the physical place, it's the language, the images, and the words that come out. He helped management define what the management means. It's people, it's organization, it's leadership. And he had a philosophy of management. And I really appreciate the comment that it was also being a social activist, that it wasn't just management inside the traditional visible organization that Alf Chandler talks about, but it was management across places and people. And so I'll highlight again just 2 or 3 quotes, and I'm going to be the one that brings in some ideas because I don't have the anecdotes. You started with one, that was great. The best way to predict the future is to create it. He created a future. These are some quotes. The greatest danger in turbulence is not the turbulence, it's to act with yesterday's logic. Are we reinventing ourselves? Over his 39 or 40 books, Bruce, that I know you've read carefully and that Karen has written a dissertation on, he's learning, he's new, he's doing things. I love this quote, and I may end with it. Here I am, 58, and none of us will share our age, and I still don't know what I'm going to be when I grow up. What a great quote. This symbolizes his ideas of management, of freshness, and of learning.
Thank you for doing this, for this insight. Bruce, tell us more about Drucker, and tell me as well, in your Leader to Leader, how have Drucker's teachings influenced the editorial direction and philosophy of Leader to Leader?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first we have to start out with the fact that really, if Leader to Leader would not exist without Peter Drucker, because as I believe Michele mentioned earlier about Francis Hesselbein, so I have to really set the stage here a little bit, or else this is not going to make any sense. But Francis Hesselbein and Peter Drucker, were kind of confidants to each other, and they were collaborators. This goes back to the early 80s when Francis was the CEO of the Girl Scouts of the USA. and Peter became a pro bono consultant for the Girl Scouts. And so that lasted for 9 years until Francis retired. And in very short order, Francis founded what was then called the Peter F. Drucker Foundation for Nonprofit Management. And then 5 years after that, they decided to start a journal called Leader to Leader. So you have to remember that Peter Drucker was the honorary chairman. But when you say the words honorary, it was much more than that. He was very hands-on in those early years. And so when they decided to start the journal, it really was done from, at least partly from his principles. He wrote for the journal. Now, this was long before I became involved. I've been managing editor since 2011. I'd published a couple of articles on Peter before that. But we're talking when they started the journal in '96. So it was completely, because it was an outgrowth of what then the foundation was doing, and the foundation was in Peter's name, with Peter involved in it. And so it took into all these philosophies were kind of baked in, and they remain baked in to it. So we're always thinking, the people involved in the editorial work of Leader to Leader, of our quarterly journal, we're thinking of these principles all the time as we edit our articles. And I've been privileged to work with several people on the panel here today on Leader to Leader articles. And so, we're really looking at things like, super high quality, the things that, Drucker values of integrity, of super high quality, of being very rigorous and being original. And so that's, I think, what we bring. And we've always got these things in the back of our mind due to Peter. So I hope that that's a good way of giving you some context into the fact that Drucker, even though, as Michele said, he passed away at the end of 2005, he still lives in many things, including in our journal. Especially
his name was the first thing on it, right? It was something associated with the name itself before it became Leader to Leader.
The Leader to Leader as a publication has always been called Leader to Leader. However, the entity behind it has gone through about 4 names. It did start with Peter's name, but it changed eventually to Francis's name, and the words nonprofit management were taken off, just as things changed. So Peter kept his name on there for, I believe, 12 years, and then cycled his name off. And then it was a natural to eventually move into to Francis's name and to move from management into leadership. So that's the kind of etymology of the name.
Thank you. Michele, he mentioned your name, but I'm going to come back after Karen's, because I want to have Karen answer me and answer us. You're an author, you wrote books about Drucker. Mm-hmm. What personal lesson or lessons from Druckers has profoundly shaped your perspective as an author and a teacher?
I think I'm going to follow up also on something that Dr. Dave said about language. Drucker said that language was sacred. And I've heard that reiterated by a number of people who knew him. And I think one of the things I've learned from studying Drucker so intensely and reading him is the importance of effective communication. And he wrote about this in his management books, but just also reading his own text and studying the way that he wrote, you can pick up on this. And one of the things that Drucker said, this is in the management, the practice of management, but then it's reiterated in the revised edition. He said, what is effective communication? You can make the most eloquent speech. And if we want to put this in the 21st century, you could make the most beautiful PowerPoint presentation. But if it's not received by your audience, whether it's a speech or a written communication, he said, Drucker, it's just an utterance. I love that quote. So if your listener doesn't receive your beautifully well-spoken works, it doesn't matter how well you did. So you have to meet your audience. They're ready to receive, and not everybody's in the same place. And I think we kind of all know this if we've taught or if we've spoken in front of a group or if we've made a presentation. But Drucker was really, really conscious of this. And I have a funny anecdote. When this was at the end of my dissertation work, I was interviewing Peter, and it was in the summer, and we were going out to lunch. We'd had a long session at the house, and got in my car, and it was hot, and he was saying how good this hot seat felt on his sciatica. And we were talking about the second half of life, and that I had worked hard at Merrill Lynch and made money, and that allowed me to have a second career going to graduate school. And he said, "Why you chose history? That's your hang up." And his point was that you tell a story. You don't write like an academic. Make sure that you are communicating effectively to people. And that was, Drucker was criticized a lot for not using evidence and citations and footnotes and endnotes, but he didn't care. He wanted to make sure that he communicated the point that he made. So in his memoir, Adventures of a Bystander, a lot of it's storytelling, and maybe not all the facts are necessarily exactly right, but that was not his point. And I think it's a really good lesson about making sure that you're communicating effectively with your audience, and I've never forgotten that.
He didn't have references, so he had references. He had references in his research, correct?
He didn't cite in the way that a scholar would want things to be cited. So one of the critiques of Drucker's writing is that where is your citation for where you got this evidence for this particular fact that you're citing?
Thank you so much for that. Michele, I'm going to promote that interview for you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't seen the interview she had with Drucker, please see it on YouTube and in her own channel as well. Could you share insights from your 1994 interview with Drucker and its lasting impact?
Yeah, and let me start with a little context. I was, and when I left Herman Miller, I had been at Herman Miller for 9 years, and actually 13 totally. But when I left, I was recruited by President Clinton to join his administration in the Reinventing Government initiative led by Al Gore, Vice President Al Gore. And as a part of that, we were helping co-create a government that works better and costs less. That was our mission. And Peter became my hand holder. I cannot believe, I picked up the phone one day and I said, I'm just going to ask him. And he jumped at it. So for the 4 years, almost 4 years I was there, he was my hand holder. He was my guide, helping me through the complexities. And so the interview is, we had all of the executive leadership teams of all of the cabinet there. And so he was sharing his insights. I don't know if you guys know this, but he advised 5 different presidents, starting with President Truman. So my biggest insight from that was, as I listened, I watched it last night, and as I listened and watched it, I realized, it dawned on me that everything he said in that interview was reinforced by all the lessons he taught us at Herman Miller for all those years that he mentored Max and then mentored the leadership team as well. One of which probably is most prominent in my mind, or at least one of them. There's 3 that really jump out, but the one that's most important for me is about culture and people. And it's attributed that he says, culture eats strategies for breakfast. I don't remember him quite saying it like that, but the essence of that, absolutely. And he would tell us over and over again and guide us when we get in trouble. He would say, you've got to engage your people. The strategy means nothing if the people don't embrace it. And the only way you embrace it is that you have to engage them, because participation engenders shared ownership. And we actually kind of didn't listen one time, a little quick story. We were doing a whole company transformation. By the way, for Herman Miller at the time was a Fortune 300 international. So we had all the different cultures all over the place. And we were leading a whole company transformation. And we really thought we were doing really, really good until Max brought together 1,000 people representing the Herman Miller around the world. And this young man as we were bragging about how much progress we were making, raised his hand and said, Max, you guys are telling me all this glowing stuff. He said, but the Emerson quote, he said, but what you folks do speak so loud, we can't hear what you say. So basically, we found the enemy, and the enemy was us, the 7 of us on the executive leadership team. We were not walking our talk. And so then we called Peter back in to more intimately guide us through. And he would never tell you how to do it, by the way. He would give you the philosophical or the principles behind it. And he'll say that even in the interview, but not the how. So we had to figure out the how. And we figured out the how by going to the people, and by going to the people and co-creating both the vision, the mission, and how we close the gap between the vision, mission, and the current reality. So yeah, I mean, that was just amazing. In the government, same thing. The Reinventing Government Initiative, that had been gone back to the Grace Commission. If you remember way back then, it's happened over and over again, but it never took. And it didn't take because it was done to the people, and people would just say, you too shall pass.
That's fantastic. He was asking you to engage.
He was asking
engage
us
your people, engage your people.
And it was the first time that that got traction was our initiative, and that's because we had the people reinvent themselves. Yes. Rather than us imposing it on them. So
exactly, it has to come from within.
There's just one other one I just want to talk about. I think is critical, and that is his focus on doing the right thing, rather than doing the right thing, which is your mission. You know, are you really challenging your basic assumption? Is your mission relevant anymore? I mean, are you really looking at what's your purpose today? And that in the Reinventing Government Initiative, his example in the interview was the U.S. agriculture. There was a big Department of Agriculture, still is, I think, and yet only 3% of the United States population at the time, and we're talking 1994, I don't know what the percentage is now, was ag. And so we needed to re-look at the mission. Same thing with the FDA. It was one of our big successes, but their mission was safe drugs to the American people. You're never going to get completely safe drugs. And if you only limit it to the American people, then you give permission to send off drugs, unsafe drugs around the world. When we went through the reinvention, using the principles remember, Peter's guiding, I'm not that brilliant. He's guiding me through this whole thing. And they re-examined their mission, and it was safe drugs to the public, quickly. And they added the quickly because it used to take 7 years from the time a cure was developed till the time it went to market. So words do matter, particularly if they're embedded in your mission.
Efficiency, you're talking about efficiency here as well, efficiency in the process. So I do thank you for this first round. Dr. Michele, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Welcome. Well, very good. We're started the first round. Everyone, Miss Krista Newkirk is the president of the University of Redlands. She's joining us as well to celebrate with us Peter Drucker and his philosophy. And especially, she's an education leader in higher education. So I welcome you. A little bit about yourself, a few seconds, and then I'm going to ask you the first question.
Sure. Well, as my background, I am a recovering attorney. I always say I'm always in recovery and never quite cured. But I came to higher education about 20 years ago after being in the corporate sector and before that at legal firms. And I think that's helped me throughout these years. So I've worked my way up from legal counsel to chief of staff to my first presidency at Converse University in South Carolina. And then I came to the University of Redlands a little over 2 years ago. And I've really enjoyed that. And so I think that This time in higher education has been marked by turbulence and uncertainty, and it's a bit of chaos as we've all been through COVID together and such. And I think that the Drucker principles have guided us well during these times. So,
welcome. Welcome, everyone on the panel. Ms. Krista, Len, and everyone, Dave, Krista, everyone. Okay, so the question to you is, what challenges and opportunities do higher education institutions face in upholding Drucker's legacy?
well, I mean, I think that's a really good question. I think that the challenges that we have and the opportunities are, it's a time when it's easy post-COVID to slide back into the old way of doing things. People are tired, and they just want things to go back to normal. But I think what challenges us and what Peter Drucker taught us was that we can't just manage for today, we have to be managing toward the future. And so this is the time where we know we're facing a lot of change still, and we can't go back to the way that we always operated. We're going to have to learn lessons from those moments and then apply it to the future. And that's going to mean a constant approach to change management, and then how we engage in those principles are really important. So I think it's looking at this moment and realizing that although it's challenging, it creates some significant opportunities, and we have to look at what those opportunities are, understand what our students and what society needs in this moment, and think about higher education as a way to meet those needs, but realizing that that's going to come with an evolution on our part as well. And this is a time when we have to be more flexible. And I think that that's the principles for how we go about doing that are really what I think the Drucker background and model can help us with.
It's beautiful. At this moment, I'd like to ask you, panel, if you may kindly engage the audience in any way you want. And I'll ask the audience to kindly put your questions. Some of the questions I presented to the panel, it came from you when we had the registration form. I asked you to ask questions. So some of these questions really came from you as well. Now, if you may also tell us where you're from, what the location, city, state, country. I know it's a global audience we have. We have 525 registered. I see few of them because they all wanted the recording, which is the temptation is the recording after this. So if you may tell us where you're from, cities, even companies, that will be okay. In the meantime, I'm going to bring, as we celebrate Peter Drucker, we celebrate Dave Ulrich, Dr. Dave Ulrich, I'm going to bring you another panelist, surprise panelist. This panelist, the first, he is one of the most cited individual, scholar, Dr. Edwin Locke. Here he is.
Oh, great.
Here you are.
Hello.
How are you? How are you? Do you hear me well?
I hear you well.
Very good. This is Dr. Edwin Locke. Dr. Edwin Locke, there's a bit of background, and he will tell us more. We all set goals, right? We all want to have a goal. I want to finish my degree. I want to have a business. I want to have a certain amount of success in finance. You set a goal. Dr. Edwin is the one, he co-authored the goal setting theory. The goal setting theory that we teach Dr. Dave in our MBA classes, and Len and Krista, professor teaches his theory in organizational behavior classes. So you have a man here in his own right achieved, and he wanted to celebrate with us the legacy of Peter Drucker. So I welcome you.
Thank you. I should confess I'm retired, but I'm still living and I'm still writing. So
may I reveal your age? Is that something I can reveal?
85.
Okay, thank you for sharing that with us. So
and aging steadily.
Thank you for doing that, and thank you for being with us. So what do you want to say about Peter Drucker? I know most of us weren't familiar with Peter Drucker, and that's why we initially said the myth, the man. And then as we get to know him, we fell in love. We're celebrating him more. The theme was the myth, the man is no longer the myth. He's the man. He's someone we celebrate, as we celebrate Dr. Dave, as we celebrate you. What I celebrate Len and Krista and Bruce and Karen and Michele. What do you want to tell us about Peter
Okay,
Drucker?
let me confess at first. I'm not a student of Peter Drucker. I read some things in the newspaper, but I'm not well read. I've looked up some things, but I do know a lot about goal setting, and that was part of his theory or recommendations. Although I know the background, I think, somewhat better than was presented in some places. I'm an industrial psychologist. So Gary Latham from the University of Toronto and I ask ourselves the question, how do you motivate good performance? In the 1970s, people didn't have much to say. It said, oh, you got to be a nice supervisor. That alone doesn't work at all.
Yeah.
And they said, you got to have a good human relations. Well, what is a good human relation? That didn't help at all. So our inspiration came from the work of Frederick Taylor, who was famous and infamous for time and motion study. And he used heavily goals for daily performance of factory workers. And his work was picked up by a consultant, Harold Smitty, who worked for a number of large corporations, including GE and the others. And he eventually communicated with Albert Sloan, who Drucker and he did not like each other. They didn't like each other. But Sloan was actually the first to use management by objectives.
Yes.
But he didn't use that name. We started out with a term, the manager's letter. Here's what I expect you to achieve in the next quarter or the next year. So Drucker was the one who used the term. But the term actually came from what was already happening in business by Albert Sloan. And then it was widely copied for others. Now, as industrial psychologists, we wanted to do studies to find out how do you get goal setting to work? Because that's awfully general to say, like New Year's resolution. Okay, everybody set a goal. And you know that doesn't work. They forget it the next day. So we started a series of experiments, some lab experiments and some field experiments on goal setting as a method of improving performance. And these came out very well. Gary Latham was well connected to the business world, and I was well versed in the world of laboratory studies. So we worked very well together, giving each other credibility. And as we started publishing, everyone saw, oh my God, here's a theory that actually works. As you know, you were brought up in textbooks. Every textbook has 1,000 theories, which disappear with the next volume. That's just baloney. We wanted a theory that was built by induction, by putting together hundreds of studies from the field and lab to say, if we put that all together, what principles do we find that will work? What attributes of goals? How do you set them? Who sets them? How do you keep track and the like? And we discovered the best attributes of goals. Goals had to have clarity, and they needed to have challenge if you want to achieve anything. Goals required feedback for progress. Goals required knowledge of how to do the task. Goals required commitment that you get by building self-efficacy and introducing rewards, and so on and so forth. So this became very popular. And when people tried to do it, unlike many experiments, they all came out. So before we wrote our 1990 book, there were about 400 studies of goal setting. And so we used all of those to build inductively a theory by putting all of the detailed concretes together in a basic model. So this is a lot different than just spouting abstractions or spouting recommendations. This is quantitative data integrated across a wide variety of tasks, situations, outcomes, and the like. And it pretty much replaced all the other theories, which would come and go like the latest ice cream fad. So we kept doing it, and as of 2022, we had done this for 50 years. We withstood the test of time. It wasn't just here today, gone tomorrow, because it was based on a sound body of knowledge. So I totally support, I'm not a student of Drucker, but I support goal setting. And I give Taylor and Smitty and Sloan credit for being the first to use it. And I give Drucker credit for naming it and making it popular. And I think I should stop there to tell you that's where I am today, age 85.
We'll come back. We'll come back
if I
to
could jump in.
Yeah, go ahead, of course. And Dave as well.
Dr. Locke, it's what an honor to meet you. So I was a PhD student in organizational behavior back in the late 80s, and your work was, the way that it struck me was not only rigorous, but relevant. That you'd done a series of experiments, and in fact, I used your model to do a series of experiments for my dissertation, which is, we can talk about another day, but it provided it provided a blueprint for how to attack the problem. This was pre-internet, and I was trying to figure out, we knew networking was there, BitNet was there, and so when people started using the internet, how would that play out, and how would people act and behave? And so we went at that with a series of lab experiments, based on your model. But the point is that you had rigor and relevance. My dad was a fireman, totally blue collar, and was very supportive of me getting a PhD, but he had no idea what I was doing. And your work was one of the few that I could explain to my dad that he would get, that he understood.
Good for him.
Yeah.
I want to add one thing for the audience. Let's see, about 3 years ago, I decided, somebody should write an article on goal setting for business people. Because, most of our stuff is read by academics. So for the AMA Quarterly, American Management Association Quarterly, summer 2021, I wrote a short article called Guidelines for Effective Goal Setting in Organization. So this is suggestions for how to use goal setting. So it's summer 2021 issue. If you're interested, it's not copyrighted. You can do whatever you want to look at.
I'll share it as well. I have that one. I'll share those as well when the link, the audience.
So I think that would be for the manager very useful. And Tatum did a lot of studies in management, although he's now a professor, on field settings, and found, of course, they work the same if you applied it correctly. So I consider this in motivation an indisputable tool, although not the only tool, for managing. And organizations can't exist without goals. Whoever heard of a successful organization doing anything without goals? So it's not really an option. Otherwise, you're drifting out to sea. The options are how you go about doing it in a way that will work.
Exactly right. An organization, yes, an organization is made up of people with a purpose. That purpose is a goal, an objective, and those people through motivation achieve these goals. Dr. Dave, I'd like you to jump in, and Krista as well, just to honor as well Dr. Edwin briefly, and then we go back to Len with the second round.
Well, first of all, Ed, congratulations. You've only got 10 years more of work to catch up with Peter Drucker, who lived until he was 95 and obviously taught courses at 89, I think, for somebody at...
I retired in 91. No, I'm sorry. I retired in 2001. I've been retired 22 years, but I'm still writing.
The beauty of this work is that words don't retire. Words become timeless with timely
I
application.
still
So
write. I'm not dead yet.
congratulations. The best. I like to end almost every session I do with the best is yet to come, and
for me,
to
it's
continue.
hanging on as long as I can.
Krista, you want to engage Dr. Edwin in any way, or we move on?
Yeah, so Dr. Edwin, we've been using this model at the university recently through an agile management process. So can you talk a little bit about how you see the idea of when you're in an organization that has shared governance like higher education, where the decision making is engaged across the institution? How do you work, as you've seen it in that model of the SMART goal setting, feedback loop, and that way with faculty and such? I'd be curious to see that application to higher ed in your view.
You asked a tough one. You're talking about educational institutions. It's a totally different universe, because I was at University of Maryland for 34 years, and I know how it worked. Being a college president is one of the worst jobs I can ever imagine. If you did it, good for you. I couldn't do it. And one of our good leaders, who I like, Rick Kerwin, he was hired away, I think, by Ohio State, and it didn't take. One university to another didn't take, so he left. I don't know what he was doing. He was a good guy, but you have so many voices. Okay, so many groups that want their way. Judy Olean was one of our faculty, and she left Maryland to run USC. No, was it UC?
Yeah, business school, UCLA. Now she's president
Yeah.
at Quinnipiac. Yep.
Right. So, I didn't know she had retired, and I met her on that campus by chance, walking past the stoplight. And I said, "Judy, what are you doing there?" I said, "I'm dean at UCLA." So I kept up with her a little bit. She was a smart person, a nice person. She liked administration, which I wanted no part of, except at a very low level. And at one point, she got Eli Broad to donate $20 million to the school. I think it was $20 million. I said, Judy, I'm going to tell you what the reaction was without hearing from your faculty. I bet you they're all mad at you. And I was right. Everyone wants their finger in the pie, and you can't make them all happy. So I don't blame her for going somewhere else. So I can't imagine university management. In private sector management, if I were an entrepreneur, I would want a private organization. Public organization, the public's going to come down on you every day for your whole career. You don't toe the line, and it can be hell. You know what they go through for the slightest little slip of a words there. So, and if it's government, you have everybody has a different political philosophy, right?
Yes, we have break time now. So
Yeah.
2 o'clock, do we continue? We're supposed to have 5 to 10 minutes. Can we continue? No break?
Yes, I would
Okay.
continue without a break.
Okay, let's do that. Dr. Edwin, it's an honor to have you with us. I still have a question for you later on in the second round. I'm going to ask you a question specifically about goal setting.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Of course. Okay, Len, let's go back to you. Question is, what enduring lesson or ethic did Druckers instill in Claremont's graduate university's executive programs?
Thanks, James. So on the executive, I think of that as the executive ed side. Talked about some of the for-credit programs like the MBA platform, which is quite diversified now. But we still have a thriving book of business on the non-credit side, executive ed or continuing ed. And there's a great history there as well, as you all know. I'm thinking, heard from VJ and from Bernie Jaworski some fun stories. Bernie shared a story of Peter had the whole Toyota leadership team was here at the house talking with him about what to do next. And there's a strategy around being the discount provider in the field. And they went through kind of the whole presentation of why they thought that was the way they needed to go. And They asked him what they thought, what he thought about their strategy and should they continue doing this. And as Bernie tells the story, all is quiet and they're all waiting for Peter to say, what do they think about Toyota's discount strategy? And he said, you should stop. You should stop it. I think you should stop doing it. And it was as though you could hear a pin drop because it just floored them. And my understanding, if I've got the timing right, it wasn't too much later that then Lexus appeared. So I think they took to heart what he was trying to tell them. But that another example that's been profound here is Edward Jones. Of course, it's a firm that started in the 1920s, following Drucker principles. And then when they went through their big renaissance, kind of starting at about 1980, one of the young Turks, John Bachman, is installed as the managing partner. And he bases the whole expansion and kind of turnaround of Edward Jones on, squarely on Drucker principles, and got very tightly connected with Peter as he did that. Profound impact on that firm now. And now our board chair, Tim Curley, is a protege of John Bachman's and a retired Edward Jones executive, and he's now board chair here at Claremont Graduate University. So there's still an interwoven relationship between Edward Jones and between Claremont Graduate University. That whole book of business, that work still continues. The Drucker principles are core in all the programs. Every program we do for an outside group has some core Drucker component, and it might be specific, like hit you over the head with it. Like we'll have Bernie will come in and lecture on core Drucker principles and how they apply to whatever the audience is. We have the Drucker playbook, which is available online. We're going through and redoing that to make it a little bit more accessible and open to a wider audience that want to just go online and take little master classes. That's being made more modernized. But then it also just informs the whole approach. I mentioned, like with the MBA curriculum, that Drucker signature platform with leading self, leading teams, leading organization, thinking about impact on society. But that whole scale approach and the humanist or humanism side of leadership also ripples through all the executive ed programs we do. If you want to do an exec ed program leading, to learn about finance, you'd go somewhere else. Ours are definitely more leadership and more humanistic focused in the programs we do. The whole portfolio really based on Drucker still.
It's wonderful. And I hope also through this symposium, Krista and you building alliances as well between the University of Redlands and Claremont Graduate University. And Krista, I go to you. How does the University of Redlands differentiate itself in today's dynamic educational landscape?
I would say in regard to our School of Business, we intentionally and carefully renamed it last year to be the School of Business and Society and laid out the 7 principles upon which we were going to focus. And I think that really marries well with Peter Drucker's principles. And I don't think that's by mistake. Our dean was the former dean of the Drucker School, right? And so he certainly is a student of that as well as an educator and leader in that review. I think that the idea here is we really have to educate the leaders of tomorrow to be connected to the ethics of what they're doing, to build trust in what they're doing, as Michele was so well saying, that the goal is to walk the talk, and as leaders, how important that is. And then I think it's helping people find a purpose. And so understanding that there is a real purpose to this work if done well. And even as we reach this age of rapid growth and exponential growth, we still have to connect it back to the purpose, the psychology of people, and the meaning of what they're trying to accomplish, and realize that most people are looking for a way to leave a better world. When it comes down to the end of it, we all want a legacy that shows that our life in some way was a positive contribution to those around us and to the generations we leave behind us. And I think it's going back to that purpose-driven focus of leadership, of business, and how the work that we're doing connects to the why and not just the what. And so I think that's where the work that we're doing now really plays into this. And then the recent merger we did with Presidio Graduate School with their business program on sustainability lends into that as well, because here we are in a time of significant climate change, and we know that thinking through how we conduct that business in a way that protects the earth and for future generations will be really important. And so I think it's weaving its way through our whole curriculum, is this idea of ethics and diversity and inclusion and measurable goals and a purposeful leadership model and a model for the future of a model of doing good.
Thank you for sharing that. All right, so let's go to Dr. Thank you so much, Krista. Dr. Dave, which specific Drucker concept remains foundational in management today?
Well, first of all, let me encourage Michele to not give up at reinventing government. I think we may even need that today as well as we did decades ago. So don't give up on that aspiration. And the idea of what principle of Peter Drucker is important. It's kind of like saying, when you come to the United States, what did you experience? Well, there's 50 states. I mean, it's hard. But you've asked me to be clear. I will try to be clear. I'm going to suggest 4 that really grab my attention. One is what we've just talked about, outside in. Peter Drucker consistently said, and I'm going back to my quotes, I've got pages of quotes, the purpose of a business is to create a customer. The true business of any company is to make and keep customers happy. I think Drucker clearly focused not inside. The most important thing about remembering in an enterprise is to focus success is outside. He focused on customers. I think today he would add to that focus. I think, Karen, you said he was a social activist. I think he talked about serving multiple stakeholders today. That business is not about what we do, it's about what others get because of what we do. And so one of my takeaways would be, don't measure success by our activity, measure success by the value it creates for somebody else. Will our values create value for the customer? No question. For the investor? No question. It isn't just about the customer. For the community as a whole. That would be one principle that I think is evolving and going to continue to evolve. The second principle comes from a theory that we've developed. Peter Drucker redefined the field of management. We have used the term human capability, and we use it advisedly. The second message I hear from Drucker is the human part of that human capability. Talent, people. How do we manage our talent? And I think he talked about, he said, a key to greatness is to look for people's potential and spend time developing it. The key to a successful enterprise, of all the decisions an executive makes, none is more important than decisions about people. They determine the focus of the company. I think he focused aggressively on talent at a humanistic way. There's a new book coming out that I encourage everybody to read. It's called Compassion. And there's a hierarchy of compassion that we should learn so that we manage our people both with compassion and with competitiveness. And so my second principle is part of human capability, the human element. The third one I would advocate is the organization. Peter Drucker believed that organizations turn individual people into organization success. I think that's the management by objective that Dr. Locke did so well. You institutionalize a practice. He said, the purpose of any organization is to enable ordinary human beings to do extraordinary things. I've got 4. I'll do the 4th quickly. Number 1, outside in. Customers, investors, stakeholders. Create value from others because of our value. Number 2, talent, compassion, caring about the people. Number 3, organization. That's the capability of human capability, making the whole more than the parts. And then number 4 is leadership. Clearly his work is about leadership. I love the quote, leaders who work most effectively, it seems, never say I. And that's odd because they've trained themselves not to say I. They think we, they build teams. Effective leadership is not about making speeches or being liked. It's about getting results because of our attributes. So I'm going to suggest, Dr. Abe, 4, outside in, and then human capability, which includes talent, that's the human, capability, that's the organization, and leadership is the bond that connects them all.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Peter Drucker spent a great time of his journey in Japan. And from there, we have Tomomesa Yagisawa joining us. I'm going to give you time to settle in and we come back to you with a question. Welcome.
Noble-san.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Of course. I'll come back to you. Welcome. Michele, let's go to you. What was the most surprising or profound insight you gained from your conversation with Peter Drucker? I mean, we read about him. You actually had Bruce and you and others had the chance to talk to him. What insights did you get?
Not surprising, but definitely profound was his insight of the power of shared vision of co-creating the future. My goodness, I started my business in '96 and primarily Fortune 500 companies on the whole systems, whole company transformations. And it was the insight that he taught us at Herman Miller that you go to your people and you help them co-create a vision of what you want to accomplish together that is rooted in and born out of your core values. And in fact, while he was guiding us at Herman Miller through our whole company transformation, he steered us in that direction and the results were phenomenal. We went from almost dying to becoming the most admired company in the world for many years by Fortune, the best company in the world to work for, the best company for women, the best company for working mothers, the most environmentally responsible company, that's way back then, and 2 stock splits in 3 years. So by any measure, and he taught us to go to the people to co-create that vision. And that vision served as the North Star as we navigate our way to results. And the values served as our rudder. And I think when I look at my work I launched my business in '96, like I said, and it's been mainly corporations, but also nonprofits, humanitarian organizations, and how these concepts transcend sectors. Now, granted that, I work with 2 large universities. It is more complex I think it was Dr. Locke that said that it is very complex in the education sector, but it transforms. These concepts are basic truths, almost natural law. And they, so that to see that how effective that has been. I know that his work, for instance, when Kofi Annan, the Secretary General of the UN, then called for the civil society and businesses to come together to figure out a way to address our most intractable issues facing our world. It was rooted in these concepts, and they came together, and what did they do? They put together the UN Global Compact, and it's over 700 companies that work in collaboration with civil society organizations. And what's the birth out of that? Conscious capitalism, B Corps, Business for Good, which is rooted in the B Corp and conscious capitalism movement. So how these basic concepts, imagine one man having those insights and how those have blossomed into what we need to do for, the environment, or the whole ecosystem of the environment. And so I would say that's astounds me today. And so that's why I'm so true to those basic values.
Thank you for sharing that. It seems to me, and sounds that he also was a change maker in a society, not only a philosopher or thinker, but also a change maker. He's a conscience for people to change, to improve. So thank you for shining a light on this. Karen, how have you integrated some of Drucker's philosophies and teachings in your writings? Because you wrote about him. How did you do that?
Thanks, Dr. Abe. Michele, that was just a wonderful comment you made about the longevity of Drucker's ideas. And I think there's a question in the chat, and this got me thinking about one of the things that's really made me so conscious of Drucker in my writing is the way he always paid attention to the larger context. So we're looking back at Drucker and thinking about what legs his ideas have had in terms of implementation through the years. And in a very prescient way, Drucker was always looking backwards and forward at the same time. Particularly with things that were complex social problems or technological change is something that I've been thinking about a lot. And there was a question about AI in the chat. Drucker, when he wrote about technology or innovation or particularly technological change, it's fascinating to watch him think. So he would talk about something that was happening in the present. So for example, automation in the 50s. Which is, version of machines doing work that humans used to do. And people were very up in arms in the mid to early 1950s that was going to cost jobs. This was going to be hugely disruptive to society. A lot of the same conversations we're hearing about generative AI, et cetera. And Drucker, when he wrote about this, by the way, these were in magazines that were popular magazines for general audience. Drucker's writing about Henry Adams going to the World's Fair in 1900 and observing this, electrical generator, the Virgin and the Dynamo. Like, really? But talking about how that he's talking about in history, people were worried about technology in 1900 too, and here we are, but we're dealing with it. And the technology is always part of this process. And it's really helped me to keep a perspective when people are, hair on fire about whatever the latest thing that's going to send the earth into disarray. And it's really helpful for young people because they don't necessarily have that perspective. So when you're talking with younger people, whether they're students or people that you work with, Drucker gives that really sane perspective of, let's think about this and where we've been through and what we've gotten through. We've got through COVID. We got this. And especially with climate change and the things, young people have a lot on their minds. And I know Drucker's long gone, but he can really be a beacon of sanity for, I think, a younger generation.
Clarity, sanity, visionary. Amazing. Thank you, Karen, for sharing this. Bruce, which Drucker idea has generated the most discussion or resonance among your readerships? Now, as you see, Bruce, I'm kind of most of the questions to you is something to do with leader to leader, but you're free to talk about Drucker freely, whatever it is that you want to say, because it comes from you, it's different, has a different resonance. So,
well, thank you. I'll try to maybe tie this both together, because for leader to leader, in terms of the influence, so many of the people, we just did an article with Karen maybe a year or so ago on management as a leader, as a liberal art, but of course in relation to Peter Drucker. But what I want to say here in terms of the influence of the people who have written for us. So for instance, all who have written about Drucker, okay? So all of the people who have written pretty much about, who've written books, let's say, about Peter Drucker, have written articles for us, and in many cases, multiple articles. So Bob Buford, who started he was one of the three people along, with Francis, Bob Buford, and Dick Schubert, who started the Drucker Foundation. So he wrote very eloquently about Peter Drucker for us. William Cohen, Bill Cohen, who many people on this panel know, written more books about Drucker than anybody, and he's written about Drucker for us. And then also you go back to, this is before my time as managing editor, but for the 100th, for the centenary of Drucker's life in 2009, Leader to Leader did a special issue. Michele contributed an article to that. Jim Collins, all these fantastic people. And correct me if I'm wrong, Michele, but I believe Max Dupree also wrote in that issue. Yeah. So all these incredible people wrote articles about Drucker and their influence on him for Leader to Leader. And the other thing I have to say is Frances Hesselbein, who passed away almost a year ago at the age of 107. I mean, drink that in for just one moment. 107, and was fairly active till late in her life. So Frances, of course, had written about Peter extensively because they worked together for so many years. So she wrote a number of columns over the years that were very influential, that talked about Peter's life, about Peter's work, about how they worked together. So I think one contribution I can make here is that this combination of Frances Hesselbein and Peter Drucker and all the work that they did. So we just put out, or it's about to come out, most of the articles are online. We have a commemorative issue about Frances that Dave Ulrich has an article in. And so I wrote an article for that issue about, the title is something like Peter Drucker and Frances Hesselbein, maybe it's Frances Hesselbein and Peter Drucker, Masterclasses in Productive Longevity. So you have both of these people, and I think it's, the term longevity has come up several times here today, but in terms of longevity as a person and longevity as working, and Dr. Locke brought this up, he's a living example of this, that he's still contributing to the literature, in his mid-80s. So you have Peter Drucker and Frances Hesselbein, both of whom had been awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in the country, and that they did all this incredible work till very, very late in life, and work together, work separately. So in my short article of maybe just 1,000 words or so, I tried to encapsulate all of that. So I think it's just important to remember all these things about this huge, huge influence that, as much as has been said here today, and there's a huge amount of it, it still kind of scratches the surface in terms of Drucker's influence. And when I mentioned Jim Collins, and I have to say, he wrote a great article for us in that issue. Jim Collins, as many people know, wrote the foreword to a couple of Drucker's later books, and hugely influential in Jim's life, but also in the way he wrote about it, and the way that Jim said that it's not any one thing with Drucker, it's this tapestry of ideas that then have gotten out into the world and stayed out there and sort of influences. So when you have this, again, let's step back for a moment. The people who Drucker has this huge influence on are people like Jim Collins, people like Max Dupree, people like Frances Hesselbein, all sorts of people who are hugely high achievers. And that's something that always fascinated me and still fascinates me and informs my work on Drucker, which is that very high-level achievers, high achievers, were attracted to Peter Drucker, and vice versa. And what does that mean, and what can we learn from it? So I hope people will search out some of the articles on Leader to Leader that I just mentioned. Michele, Dave, Jim Collins, Max Dupree, all these things are available online. Tom Horan, by the way, I'll give a shout out to Krista. Tom Horan did a great article for us on leadership a few years ago that touched on some of these things, and of course brought up the fact that he had been previously the dean of the Drucker School.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that article is The Arc of Purposeful Leadership, and it was in the summer of 2020 for those who'd like to read it. It's a great article. Yeah, thanks, Bruce.
Thank you. Yeah.
Absolutely. Dr. Thomas Horan is the Dean of the School of Business and Society at the University of Redlands, an excellent leader. Of course, Drucker spent a good time in his business and career in Japan, and to shine a light on some of the work he did is one of his last students, Mr. Tomomesa Yagisawa. Welcome.
Yes. Thank you.
So tell me briefly a little bit about yourself, 30 seconds or less, and then I would ask you the question. And kindly, if you can engage the audience, because I'm unable to engage them. This is for everyone. If you can engage the audience in any way you want, go ahead.
It's almost on. Is it 6 a.m., 6:27?
That's right. I woke up like at 4 a.m. So I'm Tomo Yagisawa, located in Tokyo, Japan. And then I was a student of Peter Drucker in kind of early 2000s. So from 2002 to 2004. So I joined the school right after he officially retired. But I was kind of really fortunate enough to organize one of the last lectures, and I learned a lot from him. And of course, from his colleagues like Joe Machelello and Vijay Sate, etc. So this is really kind of an honor to be here. Thank you. Yes.
You're most welcome. So first question to you, how did Drucker's teachings at Claremont Graduate University resonate with your experiences as a Japanese leader?
Okay. Of course, I'm not the top leader, but one of the leaders.
Yeah.
And I work for the pharmaceutical company. And now currently I'm working on the corporate strategy there. And then I've been in really healthcare, pharmaceutical, and also health-related food product marketing or strategy, that area. And Peter Drucker really knows really well about Japan and also what is going on and also the history. So now let me begin with the kind of broader picture rather than myself. So I think in 2004, when Masatoshi Ito joined the school, he talked about Japan, and he said, Japan has been really able to concentrate on its own development, leaving world leadership to other developed countries. But he said, he kind of scolded, from now on, the Japanese must take more responsibility to lead the world. In response to this, I've been thinking and acting how I can demonstrate responsible leadership in various situations. So that was kind of the beginning of my journey. And then in the States, I launched the Parkinson's disease-related drug and thought about what is good for the patients in the society. And also I worked on some deregulation for indicate immune for the foods in Japan. So those things really kind of was given by the kind of insight from Peter Drucker. And two quotes were really kind of guiding me. One is, we cannot manage change, but we can be ahead of it. So a lot of things, we tend to think like, oh, we can still do the same thing, but that's not going to be happening. So that's one learning from him. And then another one is we cannot predict the future, but we can create it, or the change or influence on the change. So I've been really trying to do a lot of things based on his thoughts. So and now I'm not just implementing, but also showing and telling others to make changes to a better future. So that's that would be my response.
And that's what you're doing now in your forum there, right, in Japan?
Yes, that's right. That's right. So actually, 30 to 40 people. Actually, it's now running behind this program. So today, the program is without myself, but 30 to 40 professionals, actually high achievers, are joining me online, and then we do like a reflections, and then listening to each other's cases, and finding out kind of the common essence.
And that's based on Druckers. That's based on Druckers' philosophy.
That's right. And then I try to come up with the Druckers' famous quote, and then some would get some inspiration from that, and they keep trying. And then we see a lot of great accomplishments, that including actually not just business people, but also educational people in education as well.
Okay, excellent. Dr. Edwin, our goal is to finish on time, 3 o'clock. And I have one more set of questions. So to each one of you, kindly, the answers would be like within a minute. So this way we'll be able to finish on time. Dr. Edwin, how is the goal-setting theory evolving in the current corporate world? Is it still relevant?
Let me say the most important thing. Because in psychology, there's a lot of theories that I call made up of fancy words. This is called rationalism. Goal-setting theory was based on induction, which is integration of concrete results. So what keeps it up to date is there's no state in which you can say it's over. So goal-setting theory welcomes new developments. We can't predict them, but it welcomes new developments based on new discoveries. For example, how will AI get used in organizations for all the things, and how that would affect motivation? Have no clue. Have no clue. So the second thing I'd say is management of business is way more complex than 100 years ago, or even 80 years ago, because there's thousands of entrepreneurs in hundreds of companies, always coming up with something new and striving for a competitive advantage. So one of the, I don't, Drucker said this, but you have to be so alert to the world and to developments and to changes because of how they might affect you. So it's a very challenging thing because the burden on your cognitive capacity is way higher. Compare 1900, they had to learn how to build a Ford car. Okay, that was hard, not the same now. So the cognitive capacity of a great leader has to be greater, and the leader will have to use more and more people to help. So that's a very, and that implies you might have to change more often and faster than was the case in the past. So I think it's very challenging, and you can't predict what new things somebody from some countries or some company will come up with. You cannot do it. So it's alertness and the ability to say, is this important? And how do I have to change? So I think the process of becoming a leader is way harder. I really admire anyone who can do it.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Let's go back. This is the third round, the final one. So if we can keep the answers within the minute and a half, we should be able to be on time. Dr. Len, how does Claremont Graduate University today incorporate Drucker's ideas and values in its curriculum and culture? I know you touched base on that a little bit, but if you can add a little bit more things.
Yeah, sure. More CGU, university-wide, because we talked about Drucker school, for credit, we talked about the non-credit. The Burkle building, no Peter, no Burkle building, and that's become a real hub on campus for a lot of activity. I mean, as a specific example, but I think, more generally through the rest of the university, just the thinking at CGU about management as a liberal art, I think, which really came from Peter and other faculty, and now is spilled out into the interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary nature of CGU. It's in the DNA of everything, cutting across boundaries, and I think that started with Peter. I was just thinking, as people were talking, of another relationship Peter had with Jack Welch, and Welch tells a story about talking with Peter, and that Peter told him that if you can't be the top three in anything that you're trying to do, you should just get out of it. And I think that has definitely spilled over into everything that we're doing. We try to be best in class in anything we're doing. We're launching new programs. We'll only do something if we know we can do it well. We know it's going to be in high demand, and we know that there are going to be great outcomes for students. Otherwise, we just don't even attempt it. And the new professional doctorates that are coming are a good example of that. Jim Collins tells a story of talking with Peter about a point early in his career where he had a couple of books that had come out. I think the first two were Beyond Entrepreneurship and then Built to Last. And he was trying to figure out what to do next, and should he continue to build the business around the two books and then, do speaking consulting based on that. But he had an idea for another book that he wanted to do, but he was not finding the time to be able to do that. And Peter told him, and this is in Jim Collins' words, and Peter told him, it's going to be difficult for you to do both. You kind of either have to do one, or you're going to have to just set your sight on the new project and do the other. And Jim said that he took Peter's advice to do the other, and the other was writing Good to Great. And then that created the big breakout for Jim Collins' career. And he said that one conversation and the one comment with Peter changed his life. And so I think, you see that in things we're doing. I talked about Cadogan Hall. That's kind of thinking about what we need to do next, and then going all in on it, all focused on a really large project that has profound, not just a building, it has profound implications for interdisciplinary work here. You know, all kinds of things. Edward Jones, you know, Peter's famous for saying at Edward Jones, yeah, but what are you going to do come Monday? And that's the come Monday we try to do at the end of every meeting. What are we going to actually do about this? We've talked about it for 3 hours. Now what? So I see it spilling out into everything we do. The work on knowledge workers, that informed how we thought about remote work. Everything we do is so applied. It's all focused on impact on society. How does this contribute to a functioning society? All of that spills through and everything, not just in the Drucker School. So
That's
I think,
fabulous.
yeah, the impact has been pretty profound, I would say.
That's fab. Thank you for everything you do there. And thank you for introducing me to
Just
Steve.
lucky to
That's
be here.
impressive.
Yeah, thank you, Ed.
Thank you. Krista, let's go with you. There are two questions in one. So as the president of the University of Redlands, how do you envision the future of education and what role does it play in shaping the mindset of future generations? Question one. And two, in what ways can today's highest education leaders further Drucker's vision for the future?
Yeah, so starting with your first question, I want to follow up on what Len said, because it really does come back to the liberal arts, which Drucker talked about as management, and that it deals with the fundamentals of knowledge, self-knowledge, and wisdom. And if you go back to the founding of the liberal arts, it's really about how you evolve that and have it apply to today. Even with AI, those principles still apply. So think about, you know, logic was part of the trivium, the art of thinking, and how you break down the construction of arguments and how you're applying your knowledge. Grammar is how you invent and combine all of that work and the rules of how you apply it. Rhetoric is the art of communication, which is so important, especially as you're going through change management or you're talking about your purpose. Then you have the quadrivium, right? You've got math, the theory of numbers, and music, which is really the application of numbers and the way that physics and math speaks to our souls. And then you have geometry, the theory of space, and astronomy, the application of the theory of space, right, in some way, and how that relates to the greater world around us. And as you weave all of that together in this moment of time of challenge to democracy, of a challenge to bridging polarization, it's really critical that we hearken back to the fundamental elements of social sciences and we build that into curriculum for today. Thinking about how that applies to AI. I mean, think about how it applies to algorithm development. If we're going to develop an algorithm based upon what we see as success, what are we building in that's ethical in that? How are we thinking through the disparate impact you can have if you're not careful with that? How do you apply the logic as you go through that? Because that's really what all of those systems are, is they are learning and logic systems. And so we have to be really attuned to this and not think that technology is going to be a savior. We actually have to be the monitors of all of that and then teach our students how to bridge all of this in this uncertain time and use that basic knowledge and the analytical skills that it provides to meet this moment in time and to further the work of democracy. And I think it's really critical. The other thing I will say is this. What Peter Drucker taught us is that we have to keep the customer at the soul of what we do. And we're seeing right now the challenge of that with young people who are questioning the value of higher education. And they're questioning whether it's the right thing for them, whether there's really a return on investment. Despite the math, despite all of the research, we know that it is. They're still faced with real challenges today on making it affordable. And that means that we have to push ourselves harder to meet each student where they are. And I think the University of Redlands has had a really strong history of that with the Whitehead Scholars Program that became our School of Business. And that means connecting online, but also building cohorts, getting people together in ways where they have those support systems and then moving with them beyond that. So as they go out into their professional careers, we're still a support for that. And so I think all of this is really important. And it goes right back to Peter's principles the whole way through.
100%. Nice. Dr. Dave, I was going to leave this question to the last one, but then I can't but help it. She mentioned something about the consumer, but then it seems to me you added on his teachings, instead of the consumer only from outside in, you also included the employee, the talent. So in a way, you innovated on his thinking. So the question to you, how did Drucker do it? How did he do it? Did he, for him to stay relevant, he's 95 or so, and we're now all of us talking about his. I know there's a cherisher that always brought him to us, but the point is, why are we cherishing him now? Why are we talking about his legacy? For him to stay relevant after all these years, his ideas and insights of the past are timeless. We understand that. What do you think was or his magic charm?
I'm going to answer that with an example today. Today, talking about Peter Drucker, I've got 12 new quotes that I've taken that are just exceptional from people that knew him and told stories. So A, I continue to learn from those who knew him. B, I'm going to do something a little weird. Assume Peter Drucker was here today. What would I thank him for? Here's what I would thank him for. Thank you for your longevity. You stuck with it. Thank you for teaching me to navigate paradox. You heard about relevant versus rigor. You heard about long-term versus short-term. You heard about timely versus timeless. You heard about individual versus organization. Thank you for teaching me to navigate those tensions, economic, social. 3, thank you for learning. Thank you for your words that have become some of my identity. Thank you for making my identity part of who you were. And 4, thank you most of all for helping realize that value is defined by the receiver, not the giver. It's not what I do, it's what somebody else gets. And so, A, thanks to those here, I got a lot of quotes. B, thank you, Peter Drucker. And here's my advice to those listening. When you've got that 10 or 15 minutes, go Google Peter Drucker. Go Google Peter Drucker. Find out that a lot of what you think and do is based on what he thought and what he did, and pay homage to the past because it will help you shape your present.
Thank you so much. Michele, how do you feel Drucker's ideas have evolved or been interpreted in the years since your interview?
Oh my goodness.
In 1 minute, can you do that?
Okay. Well, evolved. Just look at the prominent thought leaders of our time. If you look at David Cooper Ryder and Appreciative Inquiry, that movement is rooted in the principles of that Peter brought to the world. In fact, right after 9/11, David met with Peter to talk about what he needs to contribute and grow next. And so Drucker became a mentor to David Cooper Ryder and the Appreciative Inquiry movement as well. Another example is Peter Senge, who kind of promoted both whole systems change and dialogue, all of which are rooted in Drucker's teaching. Because Peter was talking about multiple stakeholders back in '86 when he was mentoring us at Herman Miller. He was saying, don't just look at the business, look at the community, look at government, look at the whole system. And so, as Peter said, start anywhere, you'll end up everywhere. And today that's more true than ever because the boundaries are blurred today. You cannot get anything done today in an isolated as a business or as a community, or it really takes this collaboration across sectors and lines. And so, I mean, if you read Post-Capitalistic Society, I think one of his latest books, he talks about all this. He talks about the knowledge worker, that capitalism is no longer capital, land, and labor, but it is knowledge. Now, that was way back then. So it's evolved into, it's coming to fruition, these ideas. And more with the rapidly changing and the fast pace of evolution, maybe it's a radical disruption, going back to these kind of natural truths that he promoted. And so these natural truths for me had to come from his heart as well as his mind, because that's how they transcend so many businesses, so many organizations, so much time. Profound. And I would encourage those of you that are thinking that, yeah, he's one of the past. No, he's one of the future. And please take some time and read some of his stuff. He was amazing and is amazing. The spirit.
I'm sure you're saying please, because you mean well. You want to uplift them. You want to inform them. You want them to be educated and enlightened. And his ideas would lead them that way. Thank you so much.
It gives them hope and possibilities. Yes.
Thank you, Michele. Karen, let's go with you. What is the key takeaway from Drucker's principles that you believe remains underappreciated, briefly, as much as you can?
I can just piggyback off of what Michele said because it's very similar. Drucker was not a business person. He didn't come from a management background. He was an accidental management theorist. He was a political theorist and a philosopher. And his whole project was to create a functioning society of organizations. And he said if organizations can't function in an unhealthy society. So from the get-go, he was concerned with the greater good. How do we have single purpose institutions that do well and perform, but also who's going to watch out for the greater good? And Drucker was writing in the 1960s, Drucker was writing about class conflict between the educated and the uneducated, an elite versus a non-elite. We are living that. He was writing about gender. Doris is, if you know anything about Doris was a feminist. He was writing about race, the loss of manufacturing jobs and the incredible toll it took on African-American community. So if you think Drucker was a man of the past and has no relevance to the things that we're wrestling with today in terms of current events, you have another thought coming.
That's the question I have for Bruce. Bruce, thank you, Karen. How do you believe Drucker's leadership principles remain relevant for today's leaders? What do you tell Karen? I mean, Karen believes it. What do you tell the audience?
Well, what I would say is I first of all, we've heard, I think that the challenge here for all of us is just to drink in everything we've heard today and somehow make sense of it all, because I think all of the key terms are have been said today. So you have to really think about these things, but I'll play off a couple things. Len and Michele both mentioned knowledge and knowledge workers. So think about when Drucker first, from what I understand, first wrote about knowledge workers was in 1957. That's incredible. That was before there really were knowledge workers as we know them today. Yet he kind of said that, it's a given. And then it kind of built from there. And he kept on with that term throughout his life. And of course, we bandy that term around all the time, but yet it came from Drucker. And this idea of the knowledge society. And that is certainly what we're living in. The second, just real quickly, is that through Karen's good graces, and I'll be forever grateful to her for this, I was able to do the virtual online commencement for California Institute of Advanced Management, which is a very Drucker-focused school in California. And so just very coming up with Drucker values. 1, integrity. 2, effectiveness, combined with multidimensionality. The next, generosity. The next, lifelong learning. The next, communication. And then, this is on my website. I presume it's on their website as well, and flesh this out a little bit. But all these things that are really key words for today, coming from Drucker's work. So that's how I would address the relevance issue in a short period of time.
Very well said and done. Tomomesa, I have 2 questions, one for, of course, Dr. Edwin, and one for you. To you, given Drucker's significant influence in Japan, how do you see his legacy being carried forward in Japanese society, whether business or education?
Okay, let me first talk about how big the Drucker is still in Japan. So then if you go to the large bookstores, there's a section of Peter Drucker still. So compared with some bookstores in the United States, it's bigger. And then now, and then good addition is actually the in 2009, there was a book, What If the Managed List of a High School Baseball Team Leader lead Druckers management, and that made Peter Drucker really famous. So it's now known to the society as a whole. So given that situation, now actually the new young people are really leading Drucker. And there are a lot of the Drucker societies and the Drucker book clubs. So pretty much everything's got, Drucker is really live here. So, and compared with when Peter Drucker was around, now is a really time of the turbulence. I mean, really changes are really coming in and in. So the influence would be huge. And then Peter Drucker's kind of a way of talking or asking questions is really well fit with Japanese people. And now I know that there's a time limitation, so I'll put the questions I was given by Peter Drucker at the Drucker School to the chat box. So then, and I'm actually I've translated this to Japanese people, and not just by me, but people are kind of taking Peter Drucker as people are giving the nice questions, not the answers. And good questions is not kind of getting obsolete, but they're still kind of always fresh. So yeah, that way Peter Drucker is kind of keep going on in a kind of powerful way.
With people like you in Japan, I'm sure he will continue being that. Thank you so much, Tomomesa. Dr. Edwin, the last question is to you, sir. We have 45 seconds. What can you tell us? What do you want to say to us? First of all, I thank you. As we celebrate Drucker, we celebrate you. What is your last thought here in 45 seconds?
I'm glad I'm 85. I don't know what's going to happen, but it's a very dangerous time for the planet, in my opinion. But
Dr. Lee.
Again, a thank you to everyone. I'm going to leave with a very simple thought. There have been thousands of books on leadership, Drucker, etc. My simplest test: do I leave an interaction with the leader feeling better or worse about myself? I'm leaving this interaction today feeling better about the ideas that a Peter Drucker created that have shaped my life. So Dr. Abe, thank you. I leave every interaction with you feeling better about myself. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Here, yeah.
So let me end with one last quote, and then we pass it on to you. Peter Drucker: knowledge has to be improved, challenged, and increased constantly, or it vanishes. I hope to the audience, to future audience as well, to the attendees, we added some knowledge to you. I hope we cherish the legacy of Peter Drucker in a way that is vibrant, effective, and not only challenging, but engaging. To the audience, for each one of you, I thank you. And I'm going to pass it first to Len. Whatever you want to say, you go ahead and say, and then we pass it to the other. Len, thank you very much. Thank you for all you do at Claremont Graduate University. It was an honor to meet you today, and we met you before. The floor is yours, whatever you want to say.
Well, thanks for including me. I too walk away from this with a lot of takeaways, and this has been very uplifting. Just something fun and funny. I've heard from so many students and faculty about Peter's love for donuts so I did a bit of investigation. He loved eating donuts. Doris, his wife, did not like him eating donuts. So evidently he would buy a dozen donuts in the morning, and he would have to consume them throughout the day because he couldn't take the evidence home. I've heard that from so many people. It cracks me up every time everybody mentions him eating donuts in class.
That's funny. That's anything else you want to add, or we jump to Bruce, or actually we jump to Krista, and then we to Bruce.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay.
No, just to wrap up, I want to say thank you. I think that it speaks volumes that we are here on a Sunday, and some of you here in the early morning hours to talk about the importance of this really philosophy of leadership and how to engage people in a purpose-driven, meaningful way, and tools for how to think about your life in that way. And so I think it's really fundamental to the human experience and to the goals that we all have. And I thank you very much for your leading this, Abe, and for all of you who participated. I've learned a lot today, and I hope others have as well.
Thank you for all you do at the University of Redlands, and I appreciate you coming, of course. Bruce?
Abe, yeah, I second everyone. I thank you for bringing this together. And I mean what I said earlier, that I think people need to really drink in what they heard today. I'm sorry, I just was not able to kind of monitor the chat, so I may have missed some questions and being able to engage with people, but I was very much wrapped up in listening to what people had to say during this symposium. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us to kind of drink in what we said. I made tons of notes, and then think about how we can synthesize this knowledge and use it for ourselves and for our organizations and society in the future.
Bruce, thank you for doing, you do what you do. I mean, you're the cherisher, I call it, the legacy of Peter Drucker, and I continue saying that. Karen, let's go with you. Thank you for coming. And what do you want to share with us? Final thoughts.
Oh, this has been just an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. It's good to see some old friends and make some new ones. And Dr. Abe, thank you so much for including me. Appreciate it.
Of course, my pleasure. Tomomesa?
First of all, thank you very much for Len and Dr. A for including me. And this is worth waking up early in the morning. And then I think we really updated the Peter Drucker's thoughts. So then we should continue doing this. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome. Michele?
I ditto what everyone said. I do want to make one comment about Peter Drucker, because you've heard us really gloat about the importance of his philosophy. The last thing Peter would ever want is to be put up as a hero, or, this man, just for those of you who don't know him, was the most authentic and humble individual I've ever met. So if you do have time to just look at the video, the interview I did with him back in '94, you'll see that humanity come through. He is in no way puts himself on a pedestal. So however these concepts, I believe the universe just selected him to bring them through for lack of any other understanding of how one individual could get these messages out to the world in such a profound way. So just wanted to make that kind of that caveat. And
thank you,
and
Michele.
thank you for including me.
Of course, I saw you in that interview, and I saw how glowing you were talking to him, and happy and jolly and all of that thing. It's an interview worth watching. So to the audience, thank you so much. Thank you for all the questions you have. Thank you to all of you. Please, Len, Dave, and Krista, Bruce as well, if you like, do not leave. Dr. Edwin as well. For everybody else, thank you so much for attending the 4th Virtual Global Thought Leader Symposium. I wish you and bid you goodwill.